Saigon fell exactly 40 years ago today. You believe that? April 30th, 1975, the day the Vietnam War ended. And that day in history is also our video of the day. That's the last helicopter evacuating people from the roof of the American embassy. In fact, we've also learned a lot of fascinating stories about those last missions that I encourage you to learn on your own time here. Now, we all know Vietnam quagmire. We also know it's reminded a lot of folks about some of the challenges, Mike, that we've dealt with and decided which fights to get into and not, define missions and all the rest. I want to take you back to West Point. And I've always heard from grads that some of the most fascinating conversation they have is from the professors at West Point who aren't always as gung-ho about everything. They make critical decisions and strategies because they're talking to the future officers. Any of the lessons talked about what went wrong in Vietnam that you yourself as a person who was in Iraq said, my God, this feels like just what I learned in class, or maybe Afghanistan or not?
Yeah, you know, Rich, I look at that picture and I'm always getting emotional about it because that was the never again moment while I was at the military academy. That was taught to us. Never again would we be in that situation. And my instructors were Vietnam veterans. They were angry sometimes. They had bad days like we did. That was an interesting time to be at the military academy. And again, as I hear those stories and you talk about what they did in Vietnam, that is the never again moment for the U.S. military. And that's why when I come and see situations today about embassies and stuff, that brings me right back to the 70s and the 80s when I was a cadet there, when that lesson was taught to us. I mean, because 4 years after that, we had the Iranian situation with the kidnapping there. So very emotional. I was a young man at the time, didn't really get it, and then I get into the military academy, and that was really much drilled into our heads.
Do you believe that it hasn't happened again? Do you think Iraq and Afghanistan have turned into Vietnams in the sense that we just got out when we realized that it was a mistake to get in?
Probably not to the scar that left. And when I say that is because it took 10 years. It took the Reagan administration. It took, you know, in mid-'80s sometimes, I felt that cloud was lifted after Grenada in terms of how people felt about the military. I mean, look, we went through a very tough time when people didn't respect soldiers. Now, I talked to a guy yesterday on Twitter, and he was thanking me for my service, and he says, from the hot war from the Republic of Vietnam, and I'm just like, no, sir, thank you for your service, because on your backs do we now love our soldiers. We know we didn't used to do that.
I take your point about the way we treat returning servicemen. My question was, do you think the United States made the same mistake it made in Vietnam when it went into Iraq and Afghanistan?
Well, I think that the situation was a lot different then. I think that was a lot of unintended consequences for as long as it lasted. Kind of JFK's war to start, Lyndon Johnson. He got bad advice from general officers there. You didn't see, today's general officer shifts and learns, I think, a lot more and a lot faster. You had a book, Dereliction of Duty, that was written in 1999 about H.R. McMaster about they were trying to fight a World War II battle against an insurgency at the time, and we never lost those battles.
But the length, Mike, this is all, it's now the longest war, right?
Yeah.
And to that end, obviously, no one intended at that moment, but now whoever the next president's going to be, inevitably is going to have to make more decisions about the unfolding Middle East and where our lines are. We're talking about Iran or whatever else. We don't fight the same kind of wars that our grandfathers did.
Right.
So you know better than anybody at the table, what are the rules? Do you need a defined end mission before you go in? Do you need to know specifically who the enemy is and where you're willing or not willing to go when it comes to sectarian violence? You talked about the last choppers going, we have those people stranded on that mountain, right? Tens of thousands of people. Where's our line where we do or don't get involved?
You know, I'm of the generation of the Weinberger Doctrine, the Powell Doctrine. You know, clear objectives, clear escape, clear exit strategy, and the like. But unfortunately, we're faced with these limited wars, and we've got to figure out a way to how to fight them. This president is loath to do it, and that's why I think he's taken us out of the Middle East. It's literally a function of that personality of that president. I think George Bush thought that this was going to be over in months and we'd be out and we would be liberators, and he had no idea of the damage that would still be embarked on today.
But Mike, one of the lessons that I think we got out of Vietnam is don't lose. How you get there is also part of it, but don't lose, so you don't have to see that scene like we saw with the fall of Saigon. And the first Gulf War, we didn't, because we used overwhelming force. But I think there are some concerns that both Iraq and Afghanistan extended far longer than they needed to, not because we had accomplished the objective or we hadn't accomplished, because we didn't want to lose.
Yeah.
We didn't want to pull back and admit defeat or look like we were defeated.
If I could just interject for a second, in the first Gulf War, did we win that because we didn't stay? Because George Bush Sr. was wise enough to pull out?
a fair question.
The objectives were the liberation of Kuwait. It did not extend to liberation of Baghdad. Now, I can tell you, I was in Samoa, Nasiriyah, watching the Iraqi government attack their own people at the end of that war, and we couldn't do nothing about it. Again, perhaps we would have gone forward. We could have taken Baghdad. We could have overthrown that government. It wouldn't have been a problem. The forces were there.
You can't judge the first Iraqi war without looking at the second as the inevitable consequence of not finishing the job in the first.
Yeah.
Like it or dislike
Absolutely debatable, yeah.
What's even worse these days is a lot of the conflicts that we're being drawn into are religious in nature. And that, however insoluble the other problems are, you end up in a religious fight. Does it make sense to talk about military solutions to those things?
Well, you have to compare the two wars too. The Vietnam War was a draft army, over 58,000 killed, hundreds of thousands wounded. These ones are more, we've got the standoff military with drones, less casualties. We think that they're quicker. They're not. They cause the same problems. We have PTSD. We have the same issues with veterans today that we had back then. So I think that's the other side to that. So.
I could keep this going for hours. Mike, thank you as always, all right? Guys, thank you all very much. Interesting hour. We got some Hudson Valley headlines coming up. Andrew and Don will see you with me tomorrow.